Hanging with Higgins, where author and former prosecutor John J. Higgins interviews his intriguing guests about their lives, knowledge, experiences, and projects. Explore, learn, and be entertained. Come, join us now.
Good evening, and welcome to Hanging with Higgins. I'm your host, John J. Higgins. Tonight, I have a fascinating and multi-talented lady, Reverend Robyn Marie. She has many accomplishments, and I think it would take me 10 minutes to describe them all. She is an author, actress, psychic, medium, featured as a star in some television shows, as well as a radio show host in a few radio shows herself. She's a behavioral psychologist, parapsychologist, has a PhD in metaphysics and holistic life coach, and is an ordained minister. She also has a particular talent known as photo scrying, which I will have her explain later. Her website is located at www.ReverendRobynemarie.com. That's Robyn Marie, or ReverendRobynMarie.com. And I'm honored that she has made the time to appear during Halloween week, as I know she's been keeping an extremely hectic schedule. Welcome, Robyn. How are you today?
Hello, John, and thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure for sure. You have a very fascinating background. Now, I saw that you began your psychic experience at the age of 4. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, I did. I was actually born in Boston and grew up on the North Shore. And my first experience, my first recollection was at 4 years old, although my family says it goes back further than that. And that's when I began to become a clairvoyant, that I was able to see the spirits. But I also used all of my my senses, which is smell, taste, touch, seeing, and hearing them, which is highly unusual.
Wow. Well, wasn't that kind of frightening at that age, though?
Actually, I wasn't afraid. I did report it to my family. I had a lapse of time that happened, probably about 4 or 5 hours that had passed while I was supposedly outside playing. And we're not really sure what happened during that time. But I was either channeling, or people have even suggested there was an abduction that happened. So it's a lot to look into as far as research goes within the paranormal field. When I went inside and I told my grandmother that I had seen a spirit, she said, "Oh, you saw her too?"
So your family was attuned.
Yes.
Or the grandmother was as well.
Very much so.
Because I think back at that age, I think I would have been a little bit on the frightened side of having that happen. Although I did see angels at night, so...
Well, children are very open. And it's adults that teach them to fear something.
Oh, that's true. We have all these children with imaginary friends as well, so I guess that really is not uncommon in that world. But what you had certainly seems to have started at a very early age.
Yes, much like the movie that you see, The Sixth Sense. I grew up like that child.
Yeah. Well, that movie got me too. I never anticipated the end of that. So
exactly.
That was very cool. So as you were growing up, you had more of these experiences?
It was every day of my life. They were always there. I could see them walking through houses, through buildings, places we went out to, stores, certainly at school. So I had to learn and be trained by my grandmother, who also had these gifts, to be very guarded, not to just blurt something out randomly at people, because not everybody was able to accept it in the moment, she said. But never to minimize who I was and never to be ashamed of who I was. And if anyone had a problem with it, she said they had the problem and not me.
Wow. So did you tell anybody other than your grandmother as this was going on?
I told everybody anyway. I've had to learn over the years to be careful how I present things to people. And, of course, nearly everyone I meet, I begin to read them. Not consciously. It just happens automatically. And so I've learned as I said, not to just blurt it out at somebody. I always invite them if they would like to have a reading or to know some information I may have picked up.
Right. Well, now when some of these questions might be, not the best questions, as it's just very, very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there some kind of thing that distinguishes what you see as spirit as opposed to real life, or is it kind of melted together?
Well, I do see them differently than a regular human, a living spirit. I believe that we're all spirit. We're just having a human experience right now. So a lot of the characteristics of the spirit, when I see them, the deceased, I mean, is very similar to us. But, there's uneven edges. Sometimes they come through in parts. Now, if I see a full-bodied apparition, to me that's like hitting the lottery, because they're very etheric, and that's meaning that they're very solid as we are. But you can still see a difference.
Okay. And then, from anything I've read or seen, that there's a lot of spirits that just seem to be almost like memories of times past.
Yes.
Is that the case, or is it like that they're conscious and aware of what's going on in the present?
Yes, there's a difference in hauntings, and there's different forms. I know that you have experienced angels as a child and seeing that, and so they're very light and airy and angelic looking, very transparent.
Correct.
And when we see the etheric form, they're usually an intelligent haunting, so they're able to communicate very well with us. We have residual hauntings, which is almost like a hologram. And it's being played back like a tape recorder of time.
Okay.
So you cannot communicate with that. You can only experience something that they're doing almost habitually, going through the same walks of life that they may have done at that time, maybe experiencing a death, maybe experiencing something that was traumatizing to them. And so, you'll see them walk from point A to point B, and they'll do that repeatedly.
Now, with the spirit in that state, can you communicate with them at all, or are they locked?
No, when it's a residual like that, as I said, we're just seeing it almost like a movie being played back.
Well, that's just very interesting to me, because I know that having gone to Gettysburg and the battlefields and that kind of thing, to be a lot of that going on.
Yes, and you have the combination as well. So you're going to have residuals of the soldiers being killed, and, whole teams of soldiers will be marching through, and you're just seeing the memory of that being played back, the vibration that's left in the ground or even in the structures that are there. Certain materials will hold that vibration, and that's scientifically proven.
Right.
So nails, wood, things like that, certain types of wood hold on to that memory and the sounds and the vibrations of that past.
When I was at Gettysburg in the early 90s or whatever, and I think I went on one of the early ghost tours. It was a gentleman who worked for the Park Service. I think his name was Mark Nesbitt, had written these books. They were, not gigantic books, but they were about the ghost hauntings. And that whole discussion of, I saw Pickett's Charge reenacted at the 100-year mark, and when he described it, when they got to that far end up on Cemetery Hill, the Southern troops, and they let go with these double canister shells, which are like cannons with shotguns in them. The only thing that was left were smoking boots, and it made a lot of sense to me that someone was here 1 minute and then gone the next, so. And the brutality of that war particularly was pretty horrendous.
Yes, very shocking.
Yeah. And the thing that always amazed me as well was even how they crossed. As a kid when I saw it, it was really like a parade that came across the field. 10 or 12,000 of them, because that was a big thing in the 1960s. And, they marched across, basically. They didn't do it like, World War II, where they were ducking and hiding.
No, these people went by foot.
Yeah, and they were shoulder to shoulder,
mm-hmm.
and it was just insane, that kind of thing. But Gettysburg always has a fascination to me, and I assume that there's probably other places in the country that are quite like that. I know that you and Rob and Henry and that have gone to a number of different places.
Oh, yes, many battlefields, but I have to say Gettysburg pretty much tops them.
Okay. Well, it really is some kind of sacred ground there. There's just something mystical, to that.
All over.
So now, as you're growing up, then I know that you have these various degrees in that. So I'd be interested in hearing, your educational experience, because I jumped around from different things myself. So I sometimes think that the more talented people, if I can include myself in that, have a tendency of kind of jumping around.
Life was very exciting, and I come from a background that my family insisted on the more education you can get in this country. Of course, coming from Italy, to come to this country and have opportunities. So it was critical that anything I could learn from, they were going to put me into any type of program, or college courses or anything that I could join. So I have a hunger for knowledge, and I'm not going to stop where I'm at, that's for sure. So I've changed up some of my studies, however I see them as all related, and they've all been very useful in my readings.
Right. So where did you go to college in that?
Well, I actually began my studies at 5 years old, singing, dancing, and acting, and then going into Berkeley in Boston, College of Music, and I became an opera singer. So I have a long background in entertainment.
Wow. I didn't know that about you.
Yes.
See, I've learned something.
Yes, and I sang opera and musical comedy, as I said, since age 5 on stage, on and off Broadway, and on road tours and all of that. So some of my elementary schooling and all of that actually happened on the road in the wings of theaters.
Wow.
So
sometimes you get a better education that way anyway.
Well, it worked out fine.
Right.
I became very worldly and a very adventurous person, and I love people and, different cultures and different languages, and all of that just fascinates me, and that's because I have traveled so much.
Right. Well, I also think that the whole, play experience is, it's like make-believe, and for a child that must be, absolutely awesome.
Oh, yes. Any reason to dress up,
Right.
It was great. And, my family, my mother is a cover girl model and had been for almost 30 years. And, my children have gone into entertainment, and, my grandparents were award-winning ballroom dancers, and, wow. Everybody has been working for the symphony and such. They all play musical instruments, and, and I play my voice. So that was my thing.
Yeah. No, that's really fascinating. So, as you were pursuing, this, I guess your talents in terms of, psychic and medium abilities,
yes.
Somehow now you also become an ordained minister. Now, sometimes those things seem unrelated to certain populations in our country. So maybe you could explain how that all fits together for you.
Well, my training had my schooling actually went back to Roman Catholic roots, and again, coming from Italy and all of that, I was first generation born here. And so I was very close to my religion. And, of course, I was terribly cute as a teenager, and my father just wouldn't have it. So, of course, putting me into a convent for high school was the smartest thing. And, of course, I was still singing, dancing, and acting, and studying everything about, the occult and, different occults and different religions, and really spreading out my knowledge across all of mysticism and trying to understand how and why it all works. And I've been doing paid professional readings, again, since 5 years old. I first began with palmistry and tea leaves.
Okay.
And tea leaves is a dying art. So it's nice to have that in my background.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, we cleaned out houses. We do estate sales. My folks would, we'd have like a sale over the weekend, and whatever was left, we generally bought up, and that was how they started their antique business.
Uh-huh.
And actually, we bought out all the church pews out of a church the one time, all the school desks out of a school. So, we were storing a lot of stuff at times. But I used to always go through all the books in the attic. And, of course, I could take whatever I wanted. And I remember, having a book on palmistry or whatever, which was just really fascinating to me that, the imprint on a hand could, have some kind of predictability of, either
yes.
rates
It's
or...
amazing, and that's a science. I can teach that to anyone.
Wow.
So it doesn't have to have psychic abilities.
Do you know where that originally came from?
Oh, now I'm going to be put under the gun. I believe around the 1500s or so that it really came into play as far as it being a science and being recorded. But it goes way back to the dawn of time.
Yeah. Well, there's certain things that fascinate me, and the reason I ask that is that, I think astrology has, there's just too many coincidences in how it fits into everything.
Yes.
And,
well, going back to Romania and Hungary and Transylvania and all of those countries in there, to the south, let me see if I have my map right, the southeast of Russia, that we see the gypsies starting to form. And so they really were pronounced in reading palmistry.
Right. Well, like I say, it seems to me that there is some science to it, and it just kind of makes sense to me if we have, two partial cells that combine together with 48 chromosomes, human in a very unique way with certain attributes. Why couldn't the same thing be, evidenced in somebody's hand or in the position of stars at the time of someone's birth?
Exactly, same as astrology and even reading the tarot cards and numerology, and all of those kind of intertwine with each other.
Right. Yeah, and the reason I kind of asked you, how that all fit in, because particularly Roman Catholicism was not always kind to those arts, to say the least.
And yet, Catholicism actually stemmed from all of that. So, as we look back in history, and a lot of it's incorporated in it, we look at the use of incense, in the church, and it's to calm everybody in the church and to connect us with our loved ones that have passed on, or to bring us to our higher essence, which is closer to God, or whatever we see as the divine power over us. We use holy water, and we see water being used all the way back again to the dawn of time, with the pagans and the Wiccans forming. And it was a very natural process to bring all of the elements into our moment of prayer.
No, that's true. And it's just as we're sitting here, I'm thinking of the story of the three wise men, right? They followed stars to find where the Christ child was born. So, I mean, it's already woven within there.
And the star is actually one of the cards that's in the tarot deck.
Ah.
In fact, I was born on that day, which is the 17th card in the tarot deck. So May 17th is my birthday. So I have that lucky star over me.
Ah. And then again, as I'm sitting here thinking, the three wise men, right? They were called the Magi.
Yes.
So they were magicians, right?
Actually, that's what it means. Yes, they were magical.
Yeah. So
I take the word magic, and some people get nervous about it, because I've worked in Salem and I've been around the witches and all of that, and I tell them magic to me means me and God in connection.
Ah. Well, I mean, I really believe that, that was the whole message of Christ, was that you didn't need the priests or the rabbis.
Exactly.
To connect. And, of course, that was a very dangerous concept, to be putting out into the world. And they were protected for, 1,000 or 1,500 years because books weren't prevalent. But once books became prevalent, then they didn't have exclusive knowledge anymore.
Yes.
So, no, that's
exactly.
very interesting. Mm-hmm. And since we are kind of in Halloween week, right, That's
My
with all
favorite time of year.
and witches, and yeah, mine too. It's one of my favorite holidays. And have you had any particular experiences? Does it seem like there's more activity during this time period, or?
I do see that it increases between now and around the Christmas season. And we believe that people are more conscious of these things at the time, thinking of spirit, thinking about our religious practices, whether you go with it or you don't go with it. I mean, either way, there's more of a presence. And certainly people tend to get readings at this time of year, again, because they feel like they have to come back to the spiritual side of themselves.
Right. Well, in terms of the seasons changing and that sort of thing, things relatively slow down again around this time of year.
Yes. Very much so. It's a time for everything to die off and fall away as we no longer need it. It's also a time to look at, our successes and accomplishments across the year. This is the harvest time. And so having a reading, it's critical right now.
Right. When I'm thinking back, I generally would have these Halloween parties because, of course, it was one of my favorite holidays. And maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I had one. And I had all kinds of things going on in the house that the guests were all getting spooked.
Uh-huh.
It was like any of the spirits that are local here were appearing at the party. It was like they had invited themselves. And I think I sent you that one picture. It looks like a Civil War soldier at the top of my stairs that's like projected out just in a weird way. And my train station was built actually in 1864. So that was towards the latter, times of the Civil War itself.
Yes, it was.
So, it just kind of, made sense to me. And it was really fascinating that of all days, that was the day that everything was, happening. So
yes.
Sometimes I think that there's time periods that just open up and, the veil becomes thinner.
Yes, it does. At this time of year, that's what we believe. It is easier for them to come through.
Yes. And when you even think about Halloween as a holiday, I mean, it's pretty like dreadful if you think about it in some way.
Well, I mean, what Hollywood has done to it, and what we've done to it, making it very negative. We have to understand the history of Halloween, and that's that it was meant to be a time to honor our loved ones that have passed away, to honor spirit. And so we have All Souls Day, and we also have All Saints Day. And as we got into Judeo-Christian beliefs, it became All Saints Day. Right.
Well, actually, this year, my sister passed away on the evening of Halloween into November 1st. And what was kind of strange about that was that, we have a flea market, and she was at the flea market. It's all around my mother's house is where it's held.
Yeah.
And she was sitting on the porch, and that Halloween was on a Sunday that year, and that was, the big flea market day. And she literally glowed that day. So much that it was just remarkable to me when I had seen her. And she'd been in a lot of pain with these failed back surgeries and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, my.
So she had really suffered and whatever. But that day, it was like there was a new life in her. And that's why it was so shocking that the next morning, she had passed overnight. And
I'm glad that you remember her that way because, in a way, we do know when it's coming. And so there will be a calming and a peace that comes over people.
Yeah. And she had, actually, she lived with my mother in my mother's house or whatever. And she had a 4-year-old daughter. But, she had climbed into bed and she held my mother's hand that night before she went off to bed she had a boyfriend. I think he got up. She was already dead when he got up. He didn't even realize it. But, it was like she was even saying goodbye then. And the weird part in my house was that overnight, all of a sudden something had really disturbed the cats to the degree that, they defecated and peed.
Oh, wow.
So I always thought that my sister had come over before she...
Yes, very, it's very likely that she did. And animals very easily are able to see spirit.
Yeah.
And some accept it, and some get kind of spooked from it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, these were the spooky kind.
Yeah, they didn't take it well.
Yeah, no, they were kind of fragile.
Scaredy cats.
Yeah, one of which was named Psycho, which she earned. That was for sure. So, this photo scrying that you've done really sounds fascinating to me. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Certainly. I've been adding to my repertoire, again, since 4 or 5 years old. And every few years I'm taught another tool of divination. And so just about 2007, I had a psychic come to me, and I was working with a team out in Boston, and she challenged me. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know my background, and thought she was going to make me walk away with egg on my face. And so in front of everybody, she handed me a photo and said, "Here, read this." And psychics know, and people out there know, that we can take a photo of anyone and do a reading. Okay. So I could take a photo of you and do a reading just as we would in person. However, something else happened, a different kind of phenomenon, and I hadn't actually experienced it before. It just didn't come up. There was a person in the photo, and he looked very disheveled, and I could not make out who it was or anything about him. It was rather shadowy, and his head was down, and as I said, rough-looking clothes. He was standing on the side of a highway, and behind him, I could see a great deal of space, so I could see all the way back to where the roads would cross over each other, like an overpass. And there was a sign, I don't know, it said something simple like Smithtown or whatever, and it could have been any place in the U.S. I had no clue. Okay. And in looking over by the overpass behind him, I saw a spirit start to form. And the spirit was walking up the street. And he was walking towards us. Okay. And he actually came full body, that I could see him very clearly. And he stood behind the still person in the photo. So now I'm not even focusing on the person that's in the picture. I'm looking at a live and animated spirit that's walking and talking. Just like seeing you. Live. It's incredible. Right. So, telepathically I'm saying, okay, what's this all about? And he came up and he said that he had been in a horrific car accident and had been killed. Wow. And he said that it happened there.
Wow.
And it was quite graphic. He showed me everything. He took me into the car where he had been crushed. And I could see and feel everything that this poor spirit had gone through. And he was a young man. And I said, well, who are you? Who do you go with? Like, who am I supposed to pass this message on to? And he said, I'm Billy.
Okay.
So that's all I got. And everything stopped. So I turned to the psychic. I told her all of this. And she pulled the picture out of my hand and she said, we're done here. And everyone around the table just sat there in awe. And, of course, I had no idea who it was, but they did. So, this was Patrick Burns, who was actually on True TV. And he's had a show on for, oh, my goodness, maybe 15 years. Okay. And I couldn't even tell who it was. And it is an old picture of him. So he was much, much younger. And this was his brother, Billy, that had been killed in a car accident right there.
Wow.
And he was revisiting that area.
Wow.
Now, he didn't let that out in public. So, generally people did not know that. And I didn't know him at that time, but I did get to know Patrick personally after that because I did share with him my findings.
Wow.
So here I found out that I can do this through photos, and I started to do it habitually. I couldn't sleep. I would just sit up night after night going over investigation photos and all types of pictures. Even family photos work very well, and that's something I did do for you, John.
Yeah, I know you did.
I actually began to read you while we were talking, and I began to get visuals from spirit, but in looking at an actual photo of your family sitting on a porch, I was able to point out to you who I had seen.
Yes.
And then from the photos, they, as I said, even though they're deceased, they're walking around quite animated, and they communicate with me very well.
Uh-huh. Well, no, I know you had seen my aunt who, she was like a...
Oh,
somewhat,
yes. What's funny? It kept kind of fading in and out in two different ways because I can almost tell what the relationship is to you when I give you a reading. So Spirit doesn't have to say in so many words, I'm his aunt, or I'm this, or I'm that. I sense it. And this is through clairsentience. We just automatically know their memories. And it kept going back and forth. I wasn't sure if she was your aunt or your mother. And then you shared with me that she actually helped in raising you.
Oh, yeah. Well, she was a nurse, and she was the first person to hold me.
Yes, she brought you into this world.
In the birthing room, or whatever they called that at the time.
Uh-huh.
We were just always very close, and, she was a real blessing in my life. So, it makes a lot of sense. And,
Yes, so to her, in her heart, she felt like she played both roles in your life. And she shared that with me. And this is what I love about doing readings. I know that I pick up crisis and trauma and all of those types of memories. But I also pick up such love and admiration that people have for each other. And it just reassures me that, we're always connected.
Yes. Which always makes a lot more sense to me than, that was always my problem with the Catholic version, or I guess Christian version, where it's one shot up or down. You do it right, or you...
Right.
You go forever into heaven.
And that's all in there. It's just maybe shifting our thought just a little bit. Not getting rid of our Christian beliefs, but maybe looking at it from just a little bit different angle.
Well, to me, it makes it richer. So,
it does. It's far beyond what any words in a book have told us. Believe me, it's amazing. Spirit comes to me quite often and shows me what they see on the other side. And I have had a near-death experience, so I've physically been on the other side as well. But to see that different spirits have different concepts and different places that they go to, and it's just incredible, the visuals that they've given me.
Right. Well, one of my favorite movies, the first time I saw it, was When Dreams May Come with Robyn Williams.
Yes.
I thought that was just so fascinating.
I actually cried through most of that movie. It was very emotional to me because I had a nurse come to me. She actually cared for cancer patients. I didn't know this. She was just a person off the street that came to me for a reading up in Salem. And this is back about 4 years ago, and I'll never forget it. She asked me to do crystal scrying. And so I took a crystal ball, and I picked up some odd little crystals that you hold in your hands, and I began to see visions in these crystals. And I told her that there were two women holding hands, and they were walking. And as they were walking, they were kicking up like pink flower petals. It was like a field, in spring when the wind blows and all the flower petals come off the trees and it just makes mounds of it on the street or in fields. And it was all very pink, and the sky was pink like it's sunset, and I saw beautiful mountains that they were walking towards with lush greenery. And, oh my goodness, it was just so overwhelming of beauty. and love was there. And
Uh-huh.
one of the ladies turned her head and said to me, "I'm going to be okay. We are going to be okay."
Wow.
And I almost felt her passion in saying that it was important for me to share that. Not an elaborate reading. There wasn't a lot of information other than telling of the beautiful vision. But I
Uh-huh.
repeated that back to my client that was sitting in the chair, of which she shared with me that she was a cancer nurse. And these were two of her clients that had recently passed away from
Wow.
breast cancer. And when we think of that, we think of the pink. And
Right.
so they were giving me that visual of pink and everything and such beauty. And she just cried and cried, knowing that her clients were finally at peace and out of pain.
Right. Well, my aunt's husband was Uncle Fellow, the way I would address him.
Uh-huh.
He was a general practitioner. He had gotten out of Cuba under the Batista regime and
Well,
had, the United States. And then at 40, he went back to school to become an eye surgeon, which I really admired because how many people would do that?
yes.
He had 4 kids, my cousins, and eventually he got sick with, I believe, it was liver cancer. Eventually, caught up with him. He had been exposed to Hep C, I guess, working in the emergency
Oh,
room
dear.
in the late 50s, early 60s. So, that was always like something fermenting beneath his body.
Yes.
And, it took a while before he passed. That was kind of a tough road for him. But the strange thing was his oncologist, who was, one of these highfalutin Columbia Presbyterian guys, one of the top of his field, had come to my cousins after he had passed,
Mm-hmm.
and he said to them, "I just had a dream the other night, and in the dream I saw a fellow, and he was like running from store to store, and
Oh,
he was having a good time, and he said to pass along that everything was fine, and that he was happy and things would be fine." And when it comes from somebody like that, you really don't expect
it's
it.
wonderful. Yes, yes. Someone that's not into all of this.
Yes. So you sit there and you go, "Wow, what?" It gives it 5 times more
Yes,
credibility.
it's very
Somebody,
real.
yeah. And I really do believe that. And anytime I've really heard of any message that comes through that way, it's always similar, that they're content and they're happy and, everything will be all right. And,
There's clarity that comes with going to the other side.
yeah,
Knowledge, wisdom, and of course we no longer have the physical body, and some spirits, it takes them time to let go of the memory of that. But once they do, then they're able to, as we say, cross over, and they go to a very happy, peaceful place. Some can do it instantly, and some it may take many years.
right, right. Now, I don't know about the troubled people, because in my career I dealt with some people that,
Certainly.
loosely would be called monsters, but, troubled in their own way and wreaked havoc, while they were here on Earth, or still are. And that kind of leads me to, one of the questions I have for you as well, is that you help law enforcement in a variety of ways through your skills.
Yes, I have worked directly with the police department, not only with my psychic abilities, but I began, as I turned towards psychology, and so I wanted to study that from a long time back, and my father said, absolutely not. So, working in social services and all of that, it's not very lucrative. So...
That's true. Yes.
So my father said, you're going to school for music instead, which was still a struggle, but I
Right.
did very well in entertainment field. What's nice is then later in life, I did go into psychology. I went to San Diego College, going on to UCSD for my specialized trainings, but that wasn't even enough to work in behavioral psychology. I loved working with the homeless community.
Uh-huh.
And within that, I found probably 80% or so come across domestic violence, sexual assault, and all of that. And so I began to specialize within that, and I studied at the San Diego Family Justice Academy, which I'm a graduate of, and very honored to be part of that. Just an amazing program. And of course, they've, spanned to other states to set up that type of program. But, getting to work with people in domestic violence, I certainly apply that to my readings as well, because these victims and victims of crime come to me many, many times.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely, a tremendous loss that occurs to them. And, the domestic violence stuff particularly, I think, is just, it's a very complex, dynamic.
Very much so.
Couple.
Yes. Yeah, it certainly is not what we see on the surface. And most of the times it goes back to the history of what we've experienced in life. Why we react to things, or why do we have patterns and attract certain people time and time again. They get out of a DV situation and they go right back into another one. And nobody can seem to understand why. And so using all of these divination tools that I have, from astrology, numerology can tell us exactly why we get into patterns and how to break them. And so going into holistic life coaching, which is where I'm at with everything now, it's just a culmination of all of my life's experiences and my educations, whatever field this was, and helping people step out of those patterns. And just be a whole person and where they want to go and what they want to be. And I help them with that mind shift. And if we're able to do that, you and me included, of course, if we can just shift our train of thought, how much we can accomplish in our life and be much happier and much richer and fulfilled.
Right. Well, that was one of the things that fascinated me about Brian Weiss and his work with, the what he calls masters, and then the past life experiences, how they, leak into a present life, which kind of makes a lot of sense, because I think that there's still some disconnects in the psychology field from, nature versus nurture. Some people are born with personalities that it doesn't make sense that they would have them from their upbringing, but they have them. So
we have to look at karmic path.
Yeah.
Why we're here, what we've brought into this lifetime. Entertaining the idea of reincarnation. Do we have to come back time and time again until we get it right? Or until we're able to experience everything? Right.
Or we find some kind of peace with it.
Yes, and therefore we move up to become a master.
Right. No, and I used to say, this was years ago before I was more on this path than I've been, was that, they say that when you die, you go up to heaven and you sing praises to the Lord. And I used to joke, I said, well, if it's immortality, I don't sing well, so I don't know what I'm doing up there. So, the whole idea.
Yeah, that's probably not the best thing then.
Yeah, no. My family, that was the joke among all of us, that we were mouthers. They told us to mouth the words, not sing.
Funny.
So, we would be in trouble if that was what eternity involved. And I think it's just more fascinating that you would come back and re-experience life in all forms, and round yourself out, almost like a college for the spirit.
Yes, and so we look into numerology and, into other types of religions, being a Taoist, that we follow the divine presence. And so it's the higher essence within ourselves. And so we're all able to attain that.
Right.
And if we take away all the political things that made us split apart in different religions, organized religions, we're all heading for the same direction. We all want love and peace and acceptance, all of us.
Right. which, of course makes I think that's why there's such, backlash at times against the organized religions because of that separation.
Yes. And so I chose to be a universalist minister. And so it's just spiritual. I accept everybody from all walks of life. And I have people who are Satanists and people who are Roman Catholics and everything in between.
Uh-huh.
And as I said, we're all trying to achieve the same things, and we want a happy, rich life.
Right. Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's like a hunger, I think, within all of us trying to find whatever that path is.
Yes, and hopefully I'm able to help people get back on track, because we all fall off it from time to time. We even need refreshers, even when we are on track, to stay there and have focus.
Right.
But then it brings me to my police work, which I think is probably my favorite and most difficult.
And why do you say that?
Well, I have to work on cold cases that have been unresolved for decades at times. I have police officers that tell me they're thoroughly crushed, they've had a disastrous life because of having to go through that experience.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen that, and even attorneys and detectives and all of that have been involved in these cases. And they say, I've gone through divorces, I've gone through nightmare after nightmare, and I can't resolve things in my life because this is haunting me. So I tell them, give me a picture of the subject, of, the victim, or the missing person, or put me in touch with the family or whatever. And I work with them. I've even been flown out to areas where these people were last seen. And I'm able to put closure on it.
Yeah.
And it's been very beneficial for the other person. However, in my making contact with the victim, sometimes I am trans-channeling what the victim went through. So the spirit is stepping into my body and using it to show me where they went, what they went through. And I'm releasing their memory so they're able to move on karmically in a very peaceful way. Sometimes they are trapped there, meaning that their memory keeps playing over this horrendous crime, or that people don't know the answers. They want the living to know.
Right.
So I walk as a bridge between the worlds. So I'm able to tell you what they saw and they experienced. I also put closure, and sometimes it's been quite surprising because the person that has gone to jail for a crime may not necessarily be the person that caused it.
Right.
And so connecting with the victim, and sometimes even as the perpetrator passes away, sometimes they're incarcerated, for 10, 20, 30 years, and they're passing away there. And they come to me, and they step into my body. And so I'm able to go on the path that the perpetrator walked, chasing the victim, murdering the victim.
Wow.
And it's horrific to go through that, and it's very physically tiring to me. I'll be sick for several days and sometimes bedridden.
Yeah.
But to help somebody know what truly happened, and maybe a person that was convicted to know that he wasn't guilty after all, what peace that can bring to his family.
Right. Well, that's got to be really difficult for you.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I just know from, having done some counseling myself, is that, people who are really good at counseling are able to put themselves in the other person's shoes. And so you can predict what should happen because that's what should happen, the way you experience it. And you can lead somebody into a healthier path.
Yes.
But that in itself is draining.
Yeah.
And because you can go through emotional roller coasters, one client after the other. What you're describing is even much more intense.
Yes.
How do you process that? Do you have somebody that you can talk to with kind of your experience that can understand that?
You know, I try to, and you're a friend of mine as well, and I guarantee the moment I start whining about these things, somebody says, oh, look at the time. Oh, I got to be going.
Huh.
They all do it to me. I could put $20 down on it that they're going to do that.
Wow.
It's overwhelming to the person to even hear it, and I'm not even so sure people could ever conceive of what I experience.
Well, I having worked on homicides with,
With that aspect, you could, yes.
we always have a team.
Yes.
So, as you do that, we have a way of kind of processing that, talking among one another without, you don't necessarily go into the pain of it or whatever, but, just even discussing it, that other people understand what you're saying.
Yes.
And I know that at times, like I'd be on a date or something, and I wouldn't be thinking as I would be talking about something I had been working on, and I thought I had it toned down.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, see the woman across from me, all of a sudden, the arms are folding, she's turning red, and, because you're talking about stuff that they really, they have no concept that stuff happens.
Yes.
And, the stuff that you just get used to dealing with. But I would think that, there would be some kind of, group that you could have that help process all of that. Because I'm sure you're not the only one who has that experience.
No, and, trans-channeling, that's really taking it to the extreme, and I certainly don't recommend that to anyone. But people like myself that have been doing this for decades, we're able to pull out of it, and we're able to stay in control of it, because when you're trans-channeling and you allow spirit to step into you, it can come across a very fine line of possession.
Yeah, I would think.
So that's where we have to stop it. So I do stay in control of it that way. But if you really need an answer from somebody that's been kidnapped or been murdered, and their family has suffered for 10, 20 years wondering what really was the truth, even when there's been a conviction, they cannot put closure. And so if I can take them to that moment, it's almost as if I die into it.
Yes.
I am fully absent from my body, and I allow that spirit to come in. And so I have to go through all those steps, and it does stay with me for days. Hopefully emotionally I can let go of a lot of it because we are trained in the field to do so.
Right.
But, I remember things.
I see how you couldn't, yes. It would have to leave a mark somewhere.
Yeah. Some I don't. Sometimes I'm so far gone and it's so absent that I don't remember part of it.
Right.
So I record things, I write things down, that I do automatic writing. And so these are full reports that I give back to the detectives or the family.
Right. Well, I'm sure that's helpful, because sometimes in these cold cases, you've pursued every lead you can think of, and quite often the piece you need is still in front of you. You just couldn't find the next piece that it went to.
How many times I've had them say to me, I knew it. I knew it was so-and-so, or I knew two people were involved as opposed to one, and so I'm able to show them that second person, or I'm able to give them such a description of the person that's there that, kind of wipes out other people that they've been suspecting, so they can narrow it down. And believe me, I don't always get told what they're going to do. It's all very confidential. But what's important is I do my piece, I give them the information, and they can go on and do with it whatever they wish.
Right.
I never get involved with what the police have to do. Yeah.
Well, of course, that's always part of the problem in the legal system, is that, only certain things are allowable as evidence, and
Yes.
Some people do get away with things because you can't, even though you have the information, you can't get it admitted into court where it would be, see the light of day.
Right.
You don't have the tool you need, and so you have to hope that someplace along the line there's some other break you get, and you're stuck, and that's just what it is. Now, you're talking about this automatic writing piece, too, so maybe you could talk about that a bit.
That's a wonderful divining tool. Again, I allow Spirit to come into me, and so they use my eyes, they use my hands, and I'm able to write or type what they are seeing and thinking.
Uh-huh.
And so their precise words will come out. That's been very beneficial, too, because I was on a particular case, and some of these things from Connecticut actually got put into the movie Cabin in the Woods. But I was channeling someone, and I began to write. And I wrote about 4 pages of information.
Uh-huh.
And I don't have much recollection of it. I really went under into a trance. And as I'm going into it, I'm conscious, and maybe the last moment that I'm coming out of it, I'm conscious of what's being said and done. But everything in between is lost. And yet I wake up out of it, and I'm able to hand somebody a report of 4 pages. And these were legal-sized pieces of paper written on both sides. Wow. And I handed it to the family that had me in to work on this particular case. And the young man absolutely shivered out of his skin. I'll never forget it. He said, "That's my grandmother's writing."
Wow.
So I actually take on the characteristics so strongly that I'm writing in the person's handwriting. I've also written in foreign languages.
Wow.
Now, I've studied 7 different languages, but I'm certainly not fluent in all of them. But, I'm familiar. So making contact with the Spirit, I think, it makes them feel comfortable because I'm familiar.
Right.
And so, phonetically, I'm able to write things. But, again, it's really them that's putting things together. So it fascinates me when I come out of it.
Well, you did this Harvey Boat story as well that way, didn't you?
Yes, a whole book, and, it's only 20 pages of writing, but the Spirit from 9/11 told me that he wanted to pass on the story of what happened that day with the children. It was important to him that the children, young children, elementary school age, would be able to learn about what happened and how community came together. So it's really not focusing on the actual act of terrorism, which a lot of people misperceive that that's what it's going to be about. It does take place on that day, but it shows how significant every person is in the community.
Right.
And so this little tugboat, a fireboat, was able to pump water up onto the streets. Now, when I came out of this, it took about 20 minutes to write the book, and I only know that because when I woke up and Spirit approached me, and I physically saw him before I went under into a trance. But the news was on, the morning news. And so when I came out of the trance, sports was on the news. Okay. So I know we were coming towards the end of it, so about 20, 25 minutes. But the book is exactly as Spirit wrote it. I wouldn't allow them to change anything, not a word, not punctuation, nothing.
Wow. So now that's available for sale, right?
Yes, it is. It's on my website. It's on Amazon. It's on Kindle. And, every place else. I mean, it's just out there. So you can find it. And that's the Harvey Boat. And
we're running out of time, which I'm not surprised at because we can talk forever. Maybe you give them, the listeners, your website information again so they have it handy.
Yes, you can Google me anywhere. It's Robyn Marie, is ROBYNE But you can also find me at my main website at www.RobynMarie.com. And that's REVROBYNEMARIE.
Well, thank you so much, Robyn. I'm just going to do some concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. It's been such an honor, and namaste.
My pleasure. For those listening, I want to say thanks to our-truth.com for making this broadcast possible. You can find more information about me and my book series, The Archangel Jeremiel and the War to Conquer Heaven, at www.john-j-higgins.com. And the website for this radio show is www.hangingwithhiggins.com. Thank you and have a good night.